When it comes to Five Nights at Freddy's, the canonicity of the books has always been unclear. Upon the release of the first book, Fnaf the Untold Story, which was later renamed The Silver Eyes, Scott claimed that while the events in the books reflected the games, they were in a separate continuity. Think of it as a parallel universe sort of thing, just with some things remaining the same. This was both reinforced and lines were blurred further upon the release of Pizzeria Simulator, where two major characters were name-dropped as book characters. These characters being Sammy Emily, a former friend and business partner of William, who is known to us as the Cassette Man in the games, and Charlie-Emily, Henry's daughter and the main character of the trilogy, and the supposed puppet in the games. These characters are only name-dropped in Pizzeria Simulator, so to get the full feel of who they are supposed to be, one must read the trilogy to get the full story. The story of a man who lost his child to someone he trusted and was irreparably struck by grief. Through the books we learn about Henry's skill in robotics, his headspace both in and outside the games, and his family unit, including his bond with his young daughter. And we also learn something else, about someone else who is never mentioned in the games, but is vitally important to the story surrounding Charlie, at least in the books. Henry has another child, a son. Charlie has a twin brother named Sammy Emily. What we know of Sammy Emily is given to us through anecdotes by Charlie in The Silver Eyes. He is described as looking a lot like her, at least when they were babies and toddlers, and in the graphic novel is shown to indeed resemble Charlie and Henry. The two used to play together a lot and were, at the time, very close. Unlike Charlie, who was Henry's favorite, Sammy was their mother's favorite and was labeled as a mama's boy. At this time, however, the family was a tight unit. Charlie recalls afternoons at the diner and her parents singing in the car whenever they returned to New Harmony, where the older diner was. They would harmonize, "We're in harmony." Now, this seems like a small detail, but this seems to reinforce that at the time the family was happy, with Henry and his wife getting along and Charlie and Sammy having a good childhood. All of this changed one evening at the diner. There was a Halloween party going on, and Henry and his wife had let their children go off to run around the diner, Rugrats style. The two were playing in a costume closet when William arrived in his spring Bonnie suit and took Sammy. Charlie began crying, but by the time the adults found her, they couldn't find Sammy and Will absconded with him. Their parents were devastated. This event was put in newspapers and led to suspicion surrounding the diner and its eventual closing. Charlie's mother eventually left the family, and Henry became more depressed until he ended his life, after which Charlie went to live with her Aunt Jen, and nobody saw the missing Sammy ever again. Except no, that didn't happen. The later books instead say that Charlie was the one who was taken and that her memory of Sammy being kidnapped was one fabricated and planted into her by her father. We'll get to why later, but the newspaper clipping was, too, either a fabrication created to keep up the ruse, which is pretty sick on Henry's part, I'll get back to that too, or an oopsie during the writing process. Indeed, incidentally, nobody of any merit remembers the incident at Fredbear's family diner, and looking at the library yields that it too just happens to have no significant details. This event, by all accounts, does not exist. Before, of course, the moment that Charlie needs it to. There's other little issues like this, but let's not dwell on them now. Let's instead tackle the books in full. When it comes to the Silver Eyes, Charlie's major arc is coming to terms with her past and trauma surrounding Fredbear's family diner, Freddy's, which for some reason she was allowed to visit after the diner fiasco, and the loss of her brother and father. Through her and her friends' rediscovery of the past, they end up finding out the truth about William, who is now going as Dave and working as a security guard in the old Freddy's and mall, and being chased by and eventually helped by the animatronics. By the end of the book, William has a springlock accident that is parallel to his death in the games, and Charlie leaves her hometown once again, making peace with her father's grave and ready to move on. Now, I will repeat this later, and I already said this before, but I want to point out here that the first book was touted as a standalone before two sequels were made. Indeed, the original book feels like a contained story, while the following two books are, well, a mess of ideas and half-started plot points. You may think this is just a potshot to criticize the books, but as you will soon see, this is important in Sammy's story. Or lack thereof. By time of the Twisted Ones, Charlie has become all consumed in her trauma and her past. behaving recklessly and obsessing over her brother, who she is suddenly seeing in nightmares along with a door. I have, 2 or 3 videos detailing the derailment of Charlie's character, so I won't go into it here. But let's leave it at Charlie spending a lot of time thinking about her brother. Even thinking about him when on a date with her not quite but almost boyfriend, John. Well, to no fault of her own. When I look at John, I too see her brother. Charlie's being stalked by William Afton's moldy corpse and a gaggle of gruesome robots using holograms to make themselves scarier. But Charlie is convinced that through discovering this mystery, she will figure out what happened to Sammy. Towards the end of the book, Charlie gets taken to a pizzeria under her house. Yes, where she is confronted by Afton, who cryptically reveals that he didn't take Sammy, but her, and then he quietly exits the plot. Down there, Charlie finds the door from her nightmares, but everything is crumbling around them, and John convinces her to leave the door. But she dies suddenly when Twisted Freddy appears out of nowhere, and she is swallowed up whole. Her friends mourn her death before someone who looks like Charlie, except older and dressed in a skin-tight dress, shows up. Everyone except John believes that it's her. This is the part where I say sexy baby shows up and ruins the plot. Throughout the Fourth Closet, Charlie is found, and she and her friends go off on 2 separate plots. Charlie's being her discovery of what happened to her and who is her skimpy doppelganger, on which it is revealed that Charlie is a robot. Not Charlie is her adult body brought to life, and the shocking reveal that Sammy was never kidnapped. Charlie was. She was killed, and Henry, distraught, built a robot to replace her, was overcome by anger and abandoned her final form, therefore ditching her teenage form too, as she'd be without an adult body, and then took his own life. So what does this mean for Sammy? Well, a lot of people seem to believe that the books were saying that Sammy is not real. Let me tell you, that is a pretty astute observation, by which I mean it would make sense to tie up that loose end and have Sammy not be real, wouldn't it? Alas, no, Sammy is very real. Henry was so obsessed with Charlie's death that his wife left him with Sammy. And in Hot Charlie's words, he grew up and he has no idea he even had a twin sister, doesn't know anything about his father, he never came back, he never asked. He's just off being normal. He is not, nor was he ever, a character. And we don't so much as even see him. Now, the problem with how Sammy was handled isn't an issue on questions and answers, it's about building and payoff. Throughout the trilogy, Sammy is a vitally important character, and his whereabouts and what happened to him are a major plot thread. So to have him written off in a paragraph towards the end of the book is not only an unsatisfying conclusion, but it shows the grave problem of the books, a lack of narrative direction. That is, when your whole trilogy is focusing on a certain plot only to lose interest in said plot. Because while Sammy is supposed to set up as a red herring, that doesn't change the fact that he was baited for 3 books and then doesn't have a proper follow-up. It was a mistake in service of a bad twist, one that, no matter which element you claim pays into that twist, doesn't naturally reach that final conclusion. Now, it would have been one thing if the Twisted Ones in the Fourth Closet Charlie was able to actually locate some evidence that Sammy hadn't died, maybe a picture taken after his supposed kidnapping or something like that. Maybe even managing the call or get a call from someone claiming to be Sammy, only for Charlie to be in denial, which tips us, the readers, off to the fact that something is off with Charlie and this situation. But the books didn't, and that makes Charlie's main focus for most of the trilogy, her drive to find her brother, moot, as in the end, Hot Charlie just tells her he didn't get his contract renewed, he's not coming back this season. He has to go now, his planet needs him. Save we didn't even get a scene of him leaving. In fact, Hot Charlie's badgering of Charlie about Sammy towards the end of the book inadvertently mirrors what the book is trying to tell us, the audience. It wasn't him, it was you. He doesn't know you exist. He's grown up and off living his life and doesn't know anything about any of this. So quit asking questions about him. I'm not saying the book is scolding the reader for their interest in Sammy Emily. I'm saying that the book itself decides it's done with Sammy and very clumsily shoves him off the table. Kind of like when one of Charlie's friends, Lamar, disappears and another friend, Marla, just says, yeah, he says he's not coming back. Though Lamar's disappearance was, noticeable for other reasons. The ironic thing being that you could have come up with a band-aid solution for this very easily by having the book end with Sammy visiting Charlie's grave like Charlie visited Henry's. And, take that part out of the original graphic novel that shows Charlie visiting Sammy's grave. It doesn't fix the major issues, but at least the bookend hides the fact that he's an otherwise dropped character. For example, the things that don't make a lot of sense, such as, why was Charlie seeing Sammy as a stand-in for her adult self? Well, there's no good explanation for this. We can wax poetic on displaced and repressed memories, but the real reason is because the twist couldn't be revealed until the very end of the book. So like the strange discrepancy in the newspaper, you have to just ignore this. But why is it like this? Well, because the twist came before the plot, everything else was treated as unnecessary details, unaware that it is details like that that make this twist hit or miss. This is also why Sammy never made an appearance in the games. The important person first and foremost was Henry Emily, with Charlie-Emily on the side. Sammy wasn't as much of a character and instead a story prompt, just a way to give Charlie a meaningful backstory that connects with the missing children incident on a more intimate level. Because while Henry had involvement by owning the business, and there is the trauma of Charlie losing her father, the connection with Sammy gives her a reason to be more invested and less on the outskirts. In a way, it gives her the right to be involved, for lack of a better term. That doesn't change how Sammy was handled. Now, how would I have written in Sammy Emily if the robot twist was the same? Well, ignoring my Twisted Ones rewrite, because that is probably what I would have gone with initially, there's a few other options. The ideal, I think, would be that instead of having Sexy Baby show up at the end of the Twisted Ones, have Sammy appear instead. Sammy rolls into town oblivious of what's going on and asking around, effectively replacing Charlie. John is suspicious as he knows that Sammy was taken and murdered, so he thinks this is a trick. But as the story goes along and kids disappear, and John gets cryptic clues that Charlie's alive, maybe Sammy gets like some twin bond stuff, the three, including Jessica, team up to figure out what happened to Charlie. Baby would still be there, but she would be more like Game Baby. And while I like Carlton coming in and basically becoming the main character, you could work Charlie and Sammy into his role with some fine-tuning. This would need some work, but I think this could fix some of the issues with the twist and certainly could get rid of that confusing situation involving fourth Charlie being Charlie and Elizabeth Afton. Could give more of a focus on Charlie by taking it off of another Charlie, and honestly probably would have made Henry look better if you just clip out the whole section about him abandoning Charlie, instead having her just not switch to her last body yet, and cleaning up the plot a little. In fact, that would actually also clean up the plot hole on how fourth Charlie and third Charlie die at the end of the book, and yet third Charlie somehow possesses fourth Charlie and appears alive at the end of the book, because the body wouldn't have been used. Third Charlie dies at the end of the book, goes into the fourth body, it's a lot cleaner. Now, there has been some speculation that maybe at some point, taking the first standalone book into account and not the two released alongside Pizzeria Simulator, that Sammy was supposed to be a more important character. Say, the puppet. I definitely would have found Sammy being the puppet to be a more compelling twist, and while I can't say that was the case, there is one chunky piece of evidence that it could have been. I'm of course talking about the save him, save her thing. The minigame that shows Charlie's death in Pizzeria Simulator is a remake of one from Fnaf 2, except for a big change. Well, a couple of changes, but the biggest one is that the child's gender has completely changed. In Save Him, you can hear Save Him being spelled out. This is obviously signs of a retcon, reusing the same scene and just stealthily changing a huge thing like that. The child who became the puppet was originally a boy. But was it Sammy? There's not enough evidence to tell. Frankly, I don't think so. So, taking into account the whole standalone thing and that the first book was just slightly edited to hint into the next books, explaining some of the leftover plot holes, and taking in Sammy's role in that book, I think Sammy was, like I said earlier, just an emotional tether to give Charlie more of a reason to connect with the missing children incident on a personal level, beyond just having her dad own the joint. Sort of like, or no, exactly like Mike's situation with his brother in the movie. But as far as the books are concerned, Sammy should have been the puppet. What with Scott saying that the books were an alternate continuity and the reveal of Charlie being the puppet looming on the horizon in the games, having that be the splitting point of the continuity would have made a lot of sense. The games would have been the scenario in which Charlie was taken, and the books would have been the scenario in which Sammy was taken. A separate side of the coin situation. a reason that he would be calling her through some sort of supernatural bond and a greater connection with the games. I think that reveal would have been sizably better than the one of Robot Charlie. And I don't just say that as a puppet fan. See, twin puppet reveal would recontextualize how we feel about the characters in both games and books, while Robo Charlie only changes how we feel about Charlie. Twin puppet gives food for thought, while thinking too deeply into Robo Charlie starts to dig up plot holes almost immediately. But moving along, there's something else that I want to discuss when it comes to Sammy Emily and the tone of the Fnaf books. So if you read the books and listen to the dialogue long enough, you notice a trend of normalcy versus weirdness. It's hard to pinpoint. So the basic layer is that Charlie has trauma about her past, so she's framed as weird or obsessed. And that the whole reason that she couldn't move on was because secretly she was a defective robot that was holding her back. Normal people, like John, Jessica, and most people mentioned, move on without any trauma or any looking back at all. Sometimes they may think about it, but they are able to live perfectly standard lives and seem confused when someone like Charlie cannot. Now, why this is important is because how Fourth Charlie describes Sammy. Full disclosure, there is no confirmation that Fourth Charlie knows anything about Sammy, and it is likely she's just deriding Charlie because she's a catty mean girl. However, the book kind of seems to imply that part of what she's saying is true, and never gives us any reason to question it. And that is that Sammy Emily left. He doesn't remember Charlie. He never came back. He grew up, and he's living as a typical, normal person, completely unaware of anything that happened. Now's a good time to talk about Henry's failures as a father. I have often been critical of Henry, mostly because both The Fourth Closet and Pizzeria Simulator prop Henry up as a tragic figure and hero, a good daddy who just loved Charlie so much. But Henry in reality is not a good dad, and I don't mean flawed, but he means well. I mean Henry flat out makes decisions that chooses himself over both of his children and plenty of others. His wife, his sister, other children who were later targeted by Afton, their families. And of course, I want to mention here, my issue isn't that Henry is a gray character or that Henry's done some awful things. My issue is that the books and games seem to, frame him as not doing awful things. There's not really ever any acknowledgement that Henry wasn't a great dad. Let's start with how Henry's decisions affect Sammy Emily, as he is the star of this video, the Forgotten Son. I know grief is hard to overcome. It's terrible. It's awful. I can't imagine what it would be like to lose a child. But I also can't imagine abandoning one kid because I lost the other. If anything, I feel like you would want to hold on to your other child, who is also grieving and is traumatized, and who is going to have a life marred from this event. But upon the death of his favorite, Henry forgot Sammy ever existed. He let his wife leave, he made no attempt to reach out, and I clarify, the book directly implies / confirms that Henry didn't make any attempt to reach out to them. There's also something else that I'll bring up in a second that confirms this. Sure, Henry's marriage might have been over, but I highly doubt that he couldn't have reconnected with his son. He just didn't really care to. He spent all his time trying to bring back Charlie. Losing a child is hard, but I wonder, would Henry have been so quick to cut off Charlie if Sammy had died? His daddy's girl? Somehow I don't think he would have. Everyone loves to play up Henry's grief, ignoring the fact that he made no attempt to get help, ignoring the fact that he let his toddlers wander alone to get snatched, because he is the ultimate victim. He hurt the most. That's a very BoJack Horseman mindset. But unlike BoJack Horseman, who gets called out and has to face consequences of his actions, when it comes to Henry, well, one character's trauma excuses all of their actions, and another's, Charlie, is seen as an inconvenience. And nobody, in the voice of the book itself, considers what Sammy is going through. What's to say Sammy didn't grow up with the same memories that Charlie did? Remember when she was taken, like she remembered him? Sure, kids can block out certain memories, but I remember things from when I was 3. Only a few things, but some things. So there's a chance Sammy does remember his sister in foggy, unclear memories. And either he knows she's dead, or his mother has been lying and saying she doesn't exist. Does he believe her? Does he know something's up? If he knows that she's dead, did he ever wonder what happened to her? He knows Dad's out of the picture. That alone can leave someone with a gaping hole. When children lack a parental figure, they can grow up feeling it. Especially if the other parent is hiding something. Yes, they will notice. And especially depending on the circumstances of a missing parent. To have the parent just dip, that leaves an open wound that has trouble healing on its own. And would he find out about Freddy's? I feel like all it would take is one quick detective binge like Charlie went on for him to uncover what happened at the diner. And then he would be in the same situation as Charlie was. By all accounts, Sammy might have grown up to be a lot like Charlie, holding memories of a diner and a sibling he can barely remember and the trauma that would be ingrained from those early development years, lacking a parent and knowing something's off. So Sammy's not just hunky-dory. He is a victim of Afton's too, just in a different way. But forget him, he's not important. I'd say more, but he's not important. And since I'm here, let me bring up something that I must have forgotten and re-remembered while writing this video. So the crux of this Charlie-Sammy twist is that Charlie's memories were recorded with a video camera. Henry created fake memories so that young Charlie wouldn't have so many large gaps. Because she is 100% not Charlie. She is Henry's creation made of his magic tears and his emotions. Which means technically she is his kid. She's just not the kid who was taken from the diner. Which means that Charlie's memory of Sammy being taken from the diner wasn't her remembering her kidnapping wrong. It was fabricated by Henry. Henry either acted out or simulated the abduction of Sammy just so Charlie would remember and believe it. He might have even made the fake newspapers, though likely those were plot hole papers. Though that would explain why in the graphic novel, Henry scrapbooked a clip of his own child's kidnapping. Oof. But why would Henry do this? Why would Henry, who believes he's bringing Charlie back to life, force her to remember such a traumatic event when he didn't have to? To make Charlie more real? But real Charlie wouldn't have seen that anyway. And even if she did, wouldn't you want to hide that from her? Wouldn't you want to try to not remind her of her supposed death? No. Henry wanted her to be as he wanted her to be. So he created trauma for no good reason. There is absolutely no good reason to give your kids lifelong memories or horrible events, and in the context of Henry abandoning Sammy, that makes this even worse. Because that means that Henry didn't consider any situation where Sammy would ever meet Charlie. He was planning to keep Charlie around for a long time at first, as he created a full range of bodies for her, but never considered that she would meet Sammy. Maybe he wasn't thinking ahead. But I think the idea of his son being in the picture never crossed his mind. It was all about Charlie. So he forced Charlie to believe her twin was dead. Because he was dead to him. Metaphorically, of course. Or, again, this was a slapdash twist written in without the greater context for how much this butchers Henry's character. That works too. The final thing I would like to point out about Sammy is irony. So Vanessa. Vanessa is pretty much a redone Elizabeth Afton. To the point where in Security Breach, the teasers hidden in Fnaf AR, it was heavily hinted that her last name started with an A. She had a father named Bill, confirmed in Security Breach, which is a nickname for William, and there were issues with her missing mother. I won't spoil the movie, but yes, Vanessa is made directly into an Elizabeth replacement there. So you create this character and fabricate a backstory to bound them as family to Afton. You create Cassie, and then you tease that her father is the Bonnie bully, which yes, makes him nearly a century old. You tease connections by having Mimic's backstory mirror Charlie's. Well, robot Charlie's. You keep bringing the old kids back. You make nearly every major character be hinted to be Michael Afton. You tease Gregory as possibly a creation of someone's. You bring us back to the past multiple times, back to that missing children incident. All these various attempts to connect the new story with the old, creating new family units and webs. And yet not once did anyone consider, I don't know, using the established connection of Henry's other child to be used in the story? Isn't that like a given? Forget making Vanessa an Afton, you could have made her an Emily, and as far as the books are concerned, it would actually make sense. And what would have been lost? Sammy is so forgotten by the books that his entire potential was yeeted into the stratosphere, which is likely why folks mistakenly believe the books suggested he wasn't real. And to clarify, I don't necessarily want them to bring back old characters because it gets messy, but if you are going to do this, instead of creating another Afton, there's a perfectly good bloodline sitting there untapped. I'm not saying I want that, but I am saying that it tapers at a loose end, you know? Now, I am aware there is a headcanon going around that Sammy Emily is the new CEO of Fazbear Entertainment. I'm not sure how I feel about that exactly, but I suppose it would make it easier for him to swoosh into a company when his father had a role in the initial opening. And Sammy's assumed age at the time, likely in his 50s unless my math is off, which it probably is, would place him at least in the proper age range for the job. That's not to say that I think it's real, and that's not to say that I think tacking Sammy's name at the end of a note saying he's the CEO will do much except make folks say, "Who?" But I digress. I hope you know a little more about Sammy Emily now. Even if the character's role was diminished, in a way, it is everything that surrounds the lack of Sammy that makes him such a curious case. My biggest issue when it comes to storytelling is, funny enough, satisfaction. Who cares about a twist if it's not satisfying? If it doesn't leave you feeling something that lingers, think of some of the best twists in movies and media, and most of the time, what makes the twist so good is it recontextualizes a story to make you say, aha, I see that, now I can rewatch the movie and I can see the twist. The results of this twist aren't satisfying, and the outcomes for the long-running plotline just stopped without so much as a look at the character who's been baited. It's not satisfying. And if it was, maybe the twist at the end of The Fourth Closet would have meant more than just a fake-out shock reveal. Henry had 2 children. He forgot one existed, and so did the games, books, and majority of the fanbase. And that's why I made Sammy the puppet. No, wait. And that's why The Fourth Closet is bad. Oh, no. That's why nobody knows who Sammy Emily is. There we go. Thanks for watching.